New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We are at episode 515. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to be with Bill Bennett today. How are you, Bill?
Good, Paul.
Thanks for coming by the studio again. It's another day with some interesting topics to delve into, and I'm quite looking forward to some of your thoughts and analysis. For those who don't know you, maybe you can just remind us where you fit into this big wide world of tech and journalism.
I've been writing about technology and business for 40 years, so it's been a long time. Been doing it in New Zealand for more than 32 years of that, so a long time. I still do some of this, some radio, a little bit of TV occasionally, newspaper work, magazines and so on. And I have my own website, which has been a bit quiet lately for one reason or another, but is generally speaking, when I'm not busy, it fires up again, and it's about to fire up again, I think.
Yeah. Oh, well, great to catch up. Now, wanted to delve into a few topics today. We want to look at what's happening in China from a technology perspective. There's obviously been a fair bit of conflict between, well, not just the US and China, but US. I think if you look at what's going on, politically, India and Australia and other nations that are, there's very military exercises and alliances, all sorts of things going on there.
There's
but
tension.
There's definitely things going on. So I want to delve into that today. I want to talk about a report that's or some news that's come out of the Financial Times, a little bit more detail than what people had been predicting, I guess, on an announcement from Apple. We're expecting around in about a week's time. Also, this new skinless robot that apparently can stare directly into your soul, is the way that's written. So I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts when we get we get to that one. It does look somewhat scary, but the company behind it isn't the sort of company we would expect such scary things from. So that will be interesting. We've got Sony and Microsoft about to go head-to-head with their new console releases. Yep. So
big launches this year.
Yeah, that's quite a big deal. It's really been a long time since we've had any sort of launch of this sort of scale. And we want to talk a little bit about broadband, and then maybe a little bit of chance to chat about hands-on with some new devices. So we'll see how we go on time. But first up, this news that's come through from the Financial Times around Apple's manoeuvres is an interesting one. We've known this is coming, that Apple are getting set to start releasing, and what we hear now is it's initially going to be, I think, two MacBooks, a 13-inch MacBook Air and new 13 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, that instead of having an Intel chip inside them are going to have an Apple chip based on the ARM technology that they license. And this is, if it's anything like their last transition, which was about 15 years ago, where they transitioned to Intel's technology, and I'm not yet convinced that it's going to be quite the same, where they just stopped with the old chips and went entirely to the new chips. But it is quite possible that they do that. But my feeling is that might take a bit longer to get to that point.
They're talking about a 2-year transition, I think.
Well, yeah. Well, I guess we'll have to see how that plays out. But effectively three new MacBooks, and by being based on the ARM technology that Apple uses, that of course is the same that sits in the iPhone, in the iPads, and varying other
watch,
devices such as the watch. And so, in terms of bringing phone and tablet apps onto the MacBooks, that makes that a whole lot simpler. But here's a question, Bill: are they going to go as far as turning the Mac into a touchscreen device, or is that one step too far? Because they've said no to that in the past, but they've also said no to varying other things, and as time goes on, that story changes.
That would be a surprise if that happens in next week's event.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be a surprise. I really don't know. I can't answer that because you'd need to have magic to be able to answer that.
And there's certainly been no rumours suggesting that they're about to do it. But it's one of those things. I was talking to somebody today around the just Mac versus Windows. They've used both platforms, and they said, "Oh, look, once I got used to a touch screen on Windows, I actually couldn't go away from it." And I guess if you use an iPad Pro, so the touch screen is just an integral part of that experience.
And I do
right?
that. I've got a MacBook, I've got a desktop Mac, and I've got an iPad. And at the moment, I'm just working with the iPad and the desktop Mac. But when I got the MacBook out again, I did find myself touching the screen.
Yeah,
you're quite right, and it was it seemed the most natural thing to do. But I think the big thing for me about what's going on with Apple is if I think back about 6 or 7 years ago when I just got fed up with Windows 8. It was just becoming a real productivity killer compared with 7, and I flipped back to 7 for a bit, and my productivity went up, and then Apple came along with a new MacBook Air they got their hands on some early Intel silicon, and it was one that had, I can't remember the details, but it was like 12 or 18 hours battery life, and it was more powerful and yada yada yada. And I went out and bought one of these, and it changed my life. It really did change my life, that I could go an entire day away from home without needing a charger. I could go on a trip across, you wouldn't get to London, but you could get to Singapore on a plane without needing a charger. Yeah. And it was life changing. And the MacBook Airs are relatively underpowered laptops, compared with what you can buy. But I don't need that for the work I do is surfing and writing and so on. I wasn't doing music or video production on the MacBook Air. It was just a simple tool. It was life changing, and my productivity shot up, and I just got this feeling that they're about to drop something similar in terms of performance upgrade with the new chips. There's some talk that they could be 20% more powerful than equivalent Intel chips, but with much lower power drain.
From a battery perspective, the ARM-based chips are so efficient, and Apple have been doing a great job at increasing the performance of each generation.
So you could be looking at 24 hours between charges, or that kind of number, and as I say, 20% more powerful, which is about what we need, for today's work. So I think we're about to see a step change like that, but I think it's not going to be an easy transition.
No, I think the transition is the thing to remember, isn't it? You're not going to be able to, by most accounts, just go and jump to one of these ARM Apple based MacBooks and expect to get the full performance on apps that weren't designed to run on the new tech. But they've got some good partnerships, right? And you can imagine that probably the key things they need to run, getting their browser, they provide their own browser out of the box. That's covered. What do you need to do in terms of productivity? Well, it's either going to be browser-based or Microsoft Office, based in most cases. I imagine that Microsoft will be ready to go or very close with the software, right?
Microsoft's got a pretty damn good Office suite running on iOS.
Yeah,
or
that's
iPadOS,
right.
Yeah.
And then Adobe would be the next most important one for Apple. And again, a very close relationship there. And in fact, we've already seen Photoshop land on the iPad, and a chunk of work there.
Flip argument, right?
Okay.
I talked just now enthusiastically about how my life changed for the better when I switched from Windows to Mac at that stage.
Yeah.
Right. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. What I didn't tell you is when I flipped from Apple the first time to Windows was when they switched from PowerPC to Intel.
Okay.
Because that transition was difficult.
Yes.
And it wasn't botched. It really wasn't botched. It was just a hard transition. And it looked at that time like you're thinking, well, these new MacBooks at the time, they were Windows computers. I mean, you could go out and buy Parallels or I forget the name of the other thing, but you could run a virtual copy of Windows on them. And it looked to me at the time, well, in effect, we're getting a Windows laptop that's running a different OS. It's the same.
And you could run Windows if you wanted to.
Yeah, and you could run Windows. And I thought, well, hang on, I can run Windows if I want to, but perhaps I just want to run Windows. And that's exactly what happened to me at that point.
Right.
And at that point, they weren't. Apple's Macs weren't that brilliant at that stage. They were good, but they weren't. There was nothing special about them, nothing better about them in that sense. So I think that Apple faces the difficulty with that transition. But the flip side of that argument is if they really do have 50% more power than Intel processors, 20-25% more processing, what's going to happen to people that make laptops that don't have these chips, that are sticking with Intel? The people that are stuck with their Intel relationships could drop terrifically behind the market. That's another possibility that we could see in the next year or so.
Now, the other aspects here are what happens to Intel, and Intel realistically they've been struggling now for a number of years on a whole lot of fronts, and then what do we see in Microsoft's world, where of course they have tried on quite a number of occasions to really bring in the ARM type architecture and to make it an important piece of their ecosystem. Now the last and they've just refreshed the Surface Pro X product, which runs that technology, and they've boosted it performance wise, and it's really, really nice, except they're still trying to join up all the compatibility dots. Now, we know there's a new build of Windows that will allow them to run basically a much broader set of Windows applications, because they're pulling through the 64-bit compatibility that they didn't have in the past, which basically means certain apps that just wouldn't run.
Well,
but
think back to the very first Surfaces, there was the Intel Surface, which was like a Windows version, and then there was this weird
the Surface RT.
That was really part of the reason why Windows 8 was a problem, was because I had 5 different mail apps on on Windows at that time, because it was just bizarre, and flipping between the two worlds within
Microsoft were trying to basically, as you say, bring together the world of the laptop with the world of the tablet, and ultimately that failed. There are no Windows phones or Windows tablets today. You do have a level obviously that touch element, but really not with a full touch-oriented operating system.
Well, I'm going to put something else into the mix here, which I think a lot of people listening are not going to like. And you know, please, get in touch if you don't like what I'm about to say. But my feeling is that Microsoft is making so much money from the enterprise, so much money from Azure, that's what's going on with Windows and Intel and so on. It's not their main game. It's an important game. It's what delivers customers from that world into their enterprise world and their cloud world and so on. But it's no longer the main thrust of the business. The business doesn't hinge on what happens. And if and it's a huge if Windows starts to decline, it's not the end of Microsoft. It's far from the end of Microsoft. It actually means it could even mean they could shuck off some of their legacy products and services and just focus on the stuff which makes them far more money and is and is their future. So so Microsoft's problem is bigger than someone else going to ARM chips. It's actually, what are we today? Is this our business? And you can see a little bit of this with their strategy with Surface. What is Surface? What is it really there for? I mean, when it first came along, we talked about it being like to showcase the capabilities of what you could do with Windows if only you had the imagination to come up with better hardware. And it was like the idea was to lift the game of the hardware makers, and it's done that. I mean,
because at that time, really, if you wanted a nice laptop, it was going to have an Apple logo on it.
Yeah.
And there weren't nice devices. Now they invented the new category when the Surface came out, the 2-in-1 type format. The iPad Pro that you have there. You also that's one of the accessories, right? As it turns it into something of a Surface device. Everyone in the industry has followed in those footsteps.
I had a Surface for a while, and it was great. It really was good, but the Surface never really captured the market share. I mean, it's if you look at the top 5 PC vendors, Microsoft doesn't appear on that list, and you go down to number 5, and Hewlett-Packard has a huge market share. So you get below the top 5, and you're talking, 1 or 2% market share. So it's never really captured the public's imagination in that sense. I mean, it's beautiful kit, and I would happily work with Surface, and I see you are there. It's fine, but it's just that I just get the feeling that Microsoft has kind of moved on, and it's and that there's this other business that it has, which is really happening, and it's taken off hugely in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of time and energy and investment that goes into Surface from a Microsoft perspective, but like Windows, it's one part of a very big business. It is a multi-billion dollar business, and I think their numbers have risen during this sort of COVID period as well. I can't remember where it lands in New Zealand dollars, but I think well over $5 billion a year, possibly now past 10 billion. So it's not a tiny business, their Surface business, but some aspects of it probably are. You look at the Surface Duo, I don't think that in itself will anytime soon be a $1 billion business.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a small, but it's tiny in comparison with the overall PC market.
They're a $1 trillion business now too, aren't they, Microsoft? Yeah. So they're so big, and we were chatting before we started around we've seen kind of a lift in that Surface has helped bring about, is that lift in Windows-based laptops now. They're probably the average selling price is higher. Yeah. We've got a better quality of device. The laptops from most vendors now, they very much rival the Apple product, but often with touch added and
I mean, if you
other
go and
things that are quite
the
beneficial.
HPs and the Dells, for example, and I'm not talking about the sort of the low end, the Chromebook end.
Yeah,
of the market.
there's always going to be the sub $1,000 laptops, but more at the business end of
get
the market.
To the business
right?
end, and they're now building. You have nowadays building you have to build beautiful laptops to be in that game. You have to, they have to be. They're almost. I mean, if I was still writing reviews, it would be getting a bit boring because they'd all get 5 stars. None of them are. It's pretty hard to find a rubbishy business laptop these days, or at least for one of from the big brands. So that's really worked. But my thought about this is, and this comes from having been in this industry forever, right? I was at the launch of the IBM PC, and I was at the death of the IBM PC when it became when it became Lenovo. IBM shucked off that business because they wanted to move into what they saw as that lucrative enterprise space where the margins were higher and so on.
Yeah.
And I can just see at one point Microsoft's going to at least be looking at that. I'd imagine somewhere in Redmond there is a Excel spreadsheet, and it won't be anyone else's spreadsheet. There'll be an Excel spreadsheet which has got a what if we flogged Windows, somewhere sitting in Redmond there is that plan.
Interesting. All right, now onto some other topics. Now Disney have made this skinless robot. And the headline from Gizmodo was that it can realistically stare directly into your soul. Now, there's been different headlines from different places, but it does look like some sort of something from a movie. And well, it's Disney. That's kind of what you expect. But for those that have tried these various sort of live chat platforms and so on. And have looked at the various robots, that is an area where the that sort of visual representation of the eyes never seems to quite work. I mean, it's probably getting better in a visual sense, but this thing's freaky.
There's a New Zealand company that does that. Soul Machines is here in Auckland.
They do, but they're something with the stare on those Soul Machines and the other ones. I don't know. It leaves me a little bit. It doesn't feel quite so real. Now
you're
I don't
aware
know,
that you're not talking to a human.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now I don't know whether the Disney product is any better, but boy, that's scary to look at with all the sort of mechanical face and so on. But you look at the eyes and you think, well, maybe there is somebody behind that thing.
Well, yeah. I mean,
but if you look anywhere else, it's just scary. So, one worth looking at anyway.
I was going to say one of the things. I mean, I'm probably a bit lucky here because I don't think I've got a soul.
Funny guy. Okay, so on to other topics, but I just wanted to give that a mention because it's one of these technology things that happens as we try and move to a world where technology does everything for us, and we try and hand over more to AI and to robots. But next up, wanted to talk about China, but drilling in a little bit to Huawei. But we've seen these varying moves from China around reducing their reliance on the US and other countries from a technology standpoint. And look, you look at New Zealand and basically every other country in the world other than China, we have really a complete reliance on China. Right now, if you want technology, every country has to be importing it from China for the very, very large majority. Now, we know that there's a change afoot. Part of this has been led by the Trump government, and if I was to pick something positive that's come out of US politics over the last few years, it's this idea that actually we spread that reliance across a few more countries, and we could delve into those reasons. But that is something that there is that move to rely, and not just technology, of course. It's clothing production and all sorts of things.
The thing is that in a sense we have I tend not to like to use this word, but we have a global technology ecosystem which relies on a single point of failure, which is China.
Yeah.
Right? And yet,
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the Koreans are very good at same things. In fact, the Koreans are probably well in advance of what's going on in China. Right? The Japanese have always been, well, not always, but as long as we've been around, have been good at these things. Apparently, Vietnam's very good at these things. So we don't have to just rely on China. But China has become very good at inserting itself into that key point within the supply chain. And I don't for a minute think that was not deliberate. And it always was. But you mentioned also Huawei, and Huawei has a hugely important role to play in this, because Huawei is China's sort of reaching for greatness in technology, and to China, Huawei is like a Microsoft or an Apple or a Google. It's a champion. It's a prestigious company, and it plays on the world stage.
Very much so.
And it does things. It does amazing things. And you only got to go along to see a Huawei display at one of these big international conferences to realise just how proud everyone is of it and what it has achieved. And it has achieved a huge amount. It's fabulous. A couple of weeks ago, the new guys that are going to be running the Huawei business, the consumer parts of the business out of New Zealand, they can't come to the country yet because they're basically because of COVID and stuff and so on. Yeah. They're overseas. I had a chat with these guys through a Zoom conference the other day. During that chat, there was a presentation about where Huawei's going, and I was looking at this, right, and they're branching out. So I first came across Huawei about 7 or 8 years ago when I was starting to look at what was going on with telecommunications companies and the infrastructure and routers and the kit that goes in to run networks and so on.
Yep, and of course they were the key player at building 2 Degrees network, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly, wireless networks.
They've been very, very much an important part of our networks here in New Zealand over a number of years before we knew them as a very capable handset maker.
Well, they started out making the branded handsets. So when you've got a telecom, and it was telecom then, or Vodafone handset, chances are it would have been a Huawei handset that had been rebadged. In much the same way that other Chinese makers now do that. They were making OEM phones and so on. And I actually look back. I reviewed a Huawei handset about 8 or 9 years ago. The first one I saw. But since then, they've grown in scope. Now, I was looking at this chart the other day of these Huawei's plans for New Zealand. In there, I saw TVs are coming, right? Robotic vacuum cleaners are on their list. So in other words, it's a soup to nuts. So Huawei is going to occupy the same sort of ecological niche, if you like, as Samsung, and then some. It's going for that same. How Samsung has. You actually start to look around at the Samsung product spectrum, and it's huge.
It is, yeah.
And Huawei's doing that. They're basically attempting to fill all those niches. They have this huge advantage because, 1 in 8 people in the world lives in China, and so they've got this enormous domestic market which dwarfs everything else.
And they've already been selling those products in China anyway.
Exactly.
They just haven't expanded out, and if they've got a choice of not selling too much else, then
quite often
that makes some sense.
Well, quite often those products aren't all that great when they first go on sale in China. But they're using that to iron out their deficiencies.
Yeah,
and then when it gets when something hits a certain quality level, that's good enough for the rest of the world now, and out it goes. And Huawei's that company. I listen to Huawei a lot. Will tell you that they are not the Chinese government. They don't represent the Chinese government, and I think that's true. But Huawei is awfully important to the Chinese government,
of course,
in that sense, in a strategic sense.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can talk about China and not talk about Huawei in the same voice. There's an enormous amount to admire in both China and in Huawei, but we are a little bit too reliant on them. And one of the reasons
They're very reliant on the US too, but that's a whole different story a different discussion.
I mean, I know we're sitting here today. It's the election in America tomorrow, and I noticed that they're boarding up all the main cities in case there's violence. Well, just imagine if those supply chains are cut off, and Apple's got a launch scheduled for next week in Los Angeles, I think it is, or somewhere, Cupertino. Well, just imagine that if California's in flames next week, that might not happen. And suddenly those iPhones and HP laptops and so on won't be winging their way to people in New Zealand because America is supply chain is screwed. It could happen. And we're very vulnerable to, we've got two technology supply chains which are quite vulnerable.
Yeah, I've definitely look forward to seeing how that maybe gets a bit more. Well, we'll get a bit more spread over the
God, I hope so.
over the years to come. But they are superpowers, and that's part of the reality. Now, the bit of news that sort of, I guess, triggered this discussion was that it's been rumoured for a little while, but there's been more coverage on it just in the last few days. Is that Huawei, who have been designing their own chips and very capable chips in their phones now for quite a number of years, are now looking at their challenges because with the US locking them out, no one can make chips for them outside of China. They've had a foundry in China that can make them, but very limited capacity. So the word is that they're building their own chip manufacturing or fabrication plant. It's going to start with low-end 45 nanometer chips. Now that's many generations behind where you'd need to be to make chips for the latest smartphones.
Well, 45 nanometers is fine for the telecommunications gear, the switching gear, and so on. So
there'd be some gear it will be fine for TVs and other bits and pieces. But of course, this is a company with very capable people. It's had very deep pockets from a research and development perspective. We know Intel have got themselves stuck a couple of generations behind what the rest of the industry has got to in terms of the chip manufacturing now. And I wouldn't be surprised if Huawei are able to actually move along reasonably quickly and get themselves into a somewhat competitive position over 2, 3, 5 years.
I think you're right. I think there's a couple of things. Huawei can't buy Intel, right? They can't buy Intel IP. What they can buy is Intel professionals, right? And I would imagine there's a huge number of Chinese nationals who are Intel employees, so that they can do that. And there actually has been a call from the Chinese government for Chinese expats to go home to help build their economy. So that it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And I should imagine that if life gets much hotter for Chinese people living in the US, then they probably will choose to go home.
It's interesting, isn't it?
So there's there's the expertise is there. But you're quite right. I mean, they're probably about 5 generations behind if they're on 45 millimeter. Sorry, nanometer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, or more. Now, looking back into a couple of other things that I thought would be good to cover off today. We're running out of time, but wanted to delve into Hyperfibre, which I just realised. I thought this was a Chorus initiative, but then I realised this is actually because it was Chorus that put on the initial event and briefing, as I recall it. Certainly there were Chorus people there, but maybe there were others. But I realised actually the Hyperfibre brand stretches across Chorus, Enable, and Ultrafast fibre, as I noticed on their Hyperfibre website today, which was news to me.
That's news to me.
Oh well, I'm glad, because I was about to title the topic Chorus, Hyperfibre, And as I was looking around, I found this hyperfibre.co.nz website. So the pleasing thing is, wherever you are in the country, other than Whangarei, because they don't seem to have with North Power have bought into it. But now, for those that are in one of those original ultra-fast broadband areas, what we now refer to as a UFB1, which accounts for about 75% of the population, we're reached with that. The 2 gigabit and 4 gigabit per second fibre is available. So if you're finding gigabit fibre is not good enough, then you've got the synchronous fibre, so therefore up to 4 gigabits up and 4 gigabits down available. Now it does create a whole lot of challenges from a firewall perspective and other things in businesses, because getting a decent firewall that can perform at that sort of level is pricey, but it's available now. Interestingly, only four internet service providers were listed on the website so far: Lightwire, MyRepublic, Orcon, and a smaller one called Bright. The prices are starting around $150 and $180 a month for those 2 and 4 gigabit per second plans. So really impressive. Great to see that, and I'm sure we'll see the others jump on board. Of course, Orcon is one of the companies from our partners, so they're part of Vocus. And of course, we have Vodafone and Spark supporting the show too, and I'm sure that in due course we will be seeing plans from them as well. But this is typical. Even when ultra fast broadband came out, for those bigger brands to be able to fully support it and put it into the market, there was a fair bit of work for them to do behind the scenes.
I mean, the first thing I want to say here, right, isn't the name Hyperfibre clever? Because when the fibre companies started selling gigabit plans, they were calling it gigabit fibre. Yeah. And the Commerce Commission stopped that, because although you get a gigabit, 50 megs is taken for management and so on, so you only actually see 950 or whatever. Yeah. So by calling it Hyperfibre, no one can say, well, that's actually 2 gigs. It's not. Yeah. It doesn't specify. So that's clever, right? The reason why the first thing is that there's not going to be a huge number of people wanting this. I mean, if you're in video production or doing music production, you're sending videos back to, say, from Wellywood to Hollywood or something, then you want this. Yep. If you're otherwise, a gig is going to be enough for just about 95% of applications, but but those people who do need it really need it, and it's going to fly. And there's going to be a few people that are just going to want it anyway because it's super fast.
Oh, absolutely.
The problem that you face if you're a Spark or a Vodafone, or even perhaps a Cool Plus or a business. You have a business-oriented approach, is that businesses might want to buy one Hyperfibre line where they would have had, multiple other lines. So, there's going to be those kinds of issues and how it's used, and also providing the level of support for those businesses is going to be hard. You do need very good backhaul to be able to get that speed.
Although that has improved, a lot in recent years, in part to cope with streaming the Rugby World Cup, and in part as we've moved to working from home.
It's also one of the reasons why it's taken them so long to get Hyperfibre out, is because that's all got to be put in place. Yeah. I would imagine anyone who's listening to the New Zealand Tech Podcast in Australia will be spitting tacks, hearing this.
It's always the discussion, isn't it? They're in a completely different level in terms of internet performance across Australia, and here we are with plans that are so fast and actually cheap, but it'll take quite some time before we really see uptake. And how good is it to have that extra headroom available? Because of course we will need it at some point in the future. But
theoretically, they can get a line up to about 10, but apparently the overhead on 10 is bigger than the overhead. As you go up higher, the overhead is higher apparently.
Well, they're saying that they will have an 8 gigabits
Yeah.
per second offering at some stage. They've chosen not to go with that right now. All right, now finally, before we wrap up, I did think the timing is such that we need to have some discussion around what's happening in the world of gaming. PlayStation 5. This is a big step, and Xbox Series X, and there's the Xbox Series S as well, and there's 2 variants of the PlayStation, but it's all landing on our shores virtually now. Over the next few days, we will start seeing
sometime later this week. I think
first
PlayStation
devices landing. If you haven't pre-ordered, then you're basically out of luck on this stuff, because there isn't enough product to go around, as is reasonably normal for these types of launches, but it seems probably more constrained than usual, I think. All the indications are that PlayStation will again continue building on the success of the PlayStation 4, and the PlayStation 5 is going to etch out the bigger share.
I had
of the
a
market.
play on a PlayStation 5 last week.
Yeah, how did you enjoy it?
Well, I was actually slightly embarrassed at my ability to play the game because I haven't played computer games in donkey's years, and I was so out of practice that I couldn't get to the late stages of the demo game, and I think the demo game was deliberately doable, but not for me. But the most remarkable thing about it, obviously the graphics are superb and are stunning, sounds excellent, but that's very dependent on the hardware that you're using. You've got to have a good screen, you've got to have good speakers and so on.
Yeah, you've got these higher refresh rates, full 4K video. I mean, I haven't seen much about 8K, but I do remember reading earlier on that technically they are able to deliver 8K on these consoles, but most gamers are going to be looking at 4K because that's where you get the quality and the refresh rates and so on.
The thing that really got me was the haptic touch on the controller.
Yeah, you were talking about that before we started and how much it impressed you.
And I read this. I read this on paper before I went along to the function. I thought, okay, it's all right.
Yeah, yeah.
And I got there and I thought, wow, this is actually pretty damn good. And it's quite another experience, to judder along and have your hands juddering along. And the controller has it's like, it looks similar to the PlayStation controllers that you know and seen before, but on the front of it there's an area which is like a touchpad.
Yeah,
and that's a haptic touchpad, and you can use that to sort of mouse around the screen and so on. Some of the time in certain apps. But the really interesting thing about it is, supposing you're going across a gravel road, the haptic touch will feel. Well, I don't know that it feels like gravel, but it doesn't feel like a smooth haptic touch. It's
wow,
and you can feel ridges on that the haptic touch thing. It's sort of I read about it. I thought it's not going to be that great. I got it and I thought this is actually far better than far more interesting than I thought it would be.
Wow.
But I wonder if perhaps after the first day or two with the machine you might think, well, okay,
big deal.
Shrug. It was brilliant at first, and you wouldn't want to go back. But maybe it's not a game changer.
Good one, Bill. Oh, well, very, very good. Well, I mean, the proof will be getting hands-on with these things, and I'm looking forward to trying them out. And we are in this different world now, of course, where PCs are iterating all the time. Yeah. The consoles don't iterate as much. In terms of value for money, these consoles look, versus what you can buy in terms of PC gaming, very good bang for buck. You're getting a very powerful
razor
machine.
blade model. Because particularly...
these are sort of they're loss-making devices, aren't they, for Microsoft and for Sony. They lose money. They give you some incredible hardware at a good price. It's no surprise that they're selling like absolute hotcakes.
But the games are a lot. And the other thing
but
is...
as they are for PC gamers, so it's, but you will end up with a device if you're a PC gamer now. Of course, you can upgrade to the latest and greatest on the PC side and keep upgrading.
That's the weird thing about the two companies is that PlayStation is PlayStation all the way, Sony all the way, whereas Microsoft's having a bit of a two-way bet with PC gaming and with Xbox. The other thing about the Xbox S which I called Xbox Lite and got told off by someone from Microsoft for calling Xbox Lite. Well,
I'm sure you would, Bill. You've got to follow the correct branding.
Yeah, well, I can call it what I like.
You can.
Yeah, but anyway, I understand that's going to be sold like a gaming as a service.
You can go. I was looking on Spark's website, and you can buy the I think the Xbox Series X and the Series S on a plan. So you just put it on it'll go on your phone account, and you'll get billed monthly. It includes their I'm trying to remember the name of the Xbox gaming part, the Xbox gaming pass, Game Pass, and so I think you get the probably Game Pass Ultimate if I've got it right, bundled in, and basically you're paying that monthly fee for access to games and the full Xbox Live membership and your device, and you can pay that over. You've got 24 months of all of those things built into the price, and then at the end of it, of course, you completely own the Xbox. And you just have to pay for your ongoing, gaming passes and so on. And I can see how that's quite tempting. There's zilch of interest. So you're not paying any more. It's actually the best value way to pay for it. But you've obviously got that commitment. Whereas if you were to buy the console and then you change your mind, of course, then you could could stop your Game Pass. Well, but overall, it's a good arrangement, and I don't think it's just Spark. But I mentioned them because I saw it on their website, and I was tempted.
My only real comment on it is that their timing would have been so much better if they could have got this out before everyone went into lockdown.
Yes.
because
might not have been good for productivity though, Bill.
No, but I think that we're probably maybe in New Zealand, maybe not in New Zealand, but in parts of the world we're going to see lockdowns for some time to come. And I think that gaming's going to go through a bit of a golden age. It kind of is a golden age of gaming anyway at the moment. But I think it's come into the fore in a way that it possibly hasn't in the past. That people, it will be a much bigger source of entertainment. And one of the queer things about gaming that has always struck me as a bit odd is I've never really quite understood the business of going to watch esports in a venue in an auditorium. Probably my age that I don't really get that. But the thing is I always thought of electronic gaming as something you participate in rather than watch. But that whole esport thing's going to come back a bit now because people are not going to go to stadiums. Maybe we will here in New Zealand, but the rest of the world, people are not going to go. Yeah,
well, we certainly are here, aren't we? No, All Blacks games and the like, which is fantastic.
But what it means is that gaming's going to become a participatory thing again. And it's going to enjoy I think it's probably going to enjoy a renaissance in the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, it's an interesting time, and of course Microsoft went through and acquired a gaming company just in the last couple of months, $7.5 billion, I think, US dollars, so north of 10 billion New Zealand.
Yeah, almost
just
real money.
For a small acquisition. Of course, you look at that and line that up against the biggest companies in the New Zealand Stock Exchange, and you realise this is it's a reasonably big deal in the scheme of it.
But Microsoft is worth $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, that brings us to the end. We're out of time to talk Apple Watch Series 6, so that'll come in another episode. And at some stage, we'll dive in a little bit deeper on my experiences with the Surface Duo as well. It has been interesting and enlightening. There are a few things that have surprised me over the last few weeks with using the Surface Duo. So, but that will come maybe in the next week or two. So, yeah, that's us. Well, I must give a huge thank you and a shout out to our show partners who make the New Zealand Tech Podcast possible. And we love them for a couple of reasons. One, supporting and funding the show. So thank you to Sumo Logic, Vodafone, Spark, Vocus, HP, Samsung, Gorilla Technology, and Umbrella Connect. And we also appreciate them for their support of the tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. And lastly, because they're so good at supporting the show, but they're willing to accept that they have zero editorial control. So we always say what we like, don't we, Bill? We're pretty straight shooters on that front, and I think we generally find most of our guests are that way. So thanks everyone. Appreciate you joining us on this episode of the New Zealand Tech Podcast, and we'll catch you again on the next one. Bill, lastly, billbennett.co.nz. That's where people need to check out your site.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone. See ya.
New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.